think it's really, really important to acknowledge unconscious bias in the workplace. I also think it's important not to just acknowledge it personally, but also to acknowledge that it exists as a whole and put systems in place to counteract it, whether that's through kind of more formalised structures for pay and progression or name-blind recruitment and things like that. I think in terms of tips for young writers, I'd say that persistence is really, really important. I'd also say that it's easier than ever now to the barriers to entry are there for established companies, but you can start a newsletter, start a blog, you can do your own content, create your own content and get it out there more easily than ever before. So don't get discouraged. The other tip I give to young writers is don't get pigeonholed into writing only about race. I think I see so many pictures from young writers who only write about their race, and I think that's a really, really quick way to get stuck down a kind of dead end in your writing career. I think it's really, really important that the industry speaks to its audience, and I think as the audience changes, the industry needs to change with it, and you're never really going to attract readers from diverse backgrounds if those backgrounds aren't reflected in the content you produce. The biggest change I think that companies can do to make things a lot better is salary transparency. I think salary transparency is really, really, really important. Today, I still think the vast majority of journalism jobs that go up do not have any information about salary, which is a really, really real recipe for inequality, essentially, both at career level at the start and also as people move through their career. So I'd really love to see more salary transparency from everyone in the industry.
So in terms of whether or not the problem's getting any better, and if we're dealing with it in quite the way that I guess we could be, I'd say we've still got a really long way to go. There have been improvements. One thing I'll certainly say over the last 2 years is that organisations are holding themselves to account a lot more, and by that I mean we're seeing a real increase in the number of organisations that have set up additional external independent steering committees and advisory boards, so that when they are kind of making announcements or internal or strategic goals around diversity, inclusion, equity and accessibility, they're actually being held account by independent individuals who have no vested interest other than holding them to account. So I think that's been a big change that we've seen and has been really helpful, I think, in pushing this agenda. In terms of some of the key problems that I think we've got here, I think there's a nervousness still around getting things wrong, not understanding where the inequities lie. I think we're still in a place where businesses need to look at the systemic challenges that create inequity and keep that level playing field not level. Sorry, can I say that bit again? Sorry, can I say that again? I think one of the problems that we have at the moment is that organisations haven't looked at the systemic problems that we have when creating processes or procedures for talent from all backgrounds. So by that, what I mean is often when we see that there's an inequity, organisations respond by creating an initiative or a programme specifically aimed at ethnic minorities or those with disabilities or those from low socioeconomic backgrounds. What we're not doing enough is looking at the actual processes that we have in place at the moment and saying, well, how do they exclude people? So rather than creating special schemes, let's actually make the processes inclusive and equitable for all in the first instance. I think that's one of the big challenges that businesses haven't quite got their head around just yet. How companies can do a better job at ensuring that they have access to and are retaining the talent that they want from diverse backgrounds is to ask them how they can do that. So quite often something that businesses overlook is the power of asking your staff, what is it like to work for us? How can it be better? Ask that question, ask it in a confidential space where they're able to speak without, fear of consequence, of the honesty in those answers. And honestly, you would start to really understand what people require to want to stay and thrive in your organisation. Yeah, hold yourself accountable. That's the first thing that managers can do to make sure that they hire inclusively. Is there any bias that's coming into what you're doing? Ask yourself, be that proactive. Every time you're in an interview, every time you're looking at a CV, ask yourself, am I still looking at skills here, or am I being swayed by information that's irrelevant, that's got nothing to do with the skills and capabilities of this individual? Make sure that you have impartial and fair, equitable processes in the first instance. Question banks, formalise the way that you interview people so that you can make sure that actually you are going based on skill set and capabilities. I feel that every organisation should do an inclusion audit of the way they attract, recruit, retain and develop and progress their talent. I think if organisations did that almost yearly, if they could do it kind of halfway through the year and then every year ongoing, they would get better and better and better at ensuring that nobody, irrespective of background, ability, ethnicity, faith, whether they're able-bodied or disabled, would have any challenges in fairly getting access to opportunities, and that's the thing I think businesses need to do. Keep reviewing the processes that you have to make sure that you get better and better at making them inclusive, so that no matter where you're from and your background, you're able to get at least the opportunity to apply and go through a recruitment process. And then if you're not chosen, maybe that's because it's not the right time for you just yet, it's not the right opportunity, but not because you're unsure as to whether your identity has played a part in that decision making.
So yeah, as my role in the diversity and inclusion pillar is basically we meet monthly, we come up with ideas, we look at activities and we discuss topics that are affecting us basically. And people with a diverse background, we just discuss what's going on. I think it's about starting a conversation and also making sure that everything we do think about this. I think as the editor I can sort of control what we cover and how we cover it, so it's always looking at opportunities where we can talk about diversity as well. I think the key thing is raising awareness of this and making it a topic which we always talk about as opposed to a topic we talk about occasionally. Whenever we think about what we're writing about or what we're doing video of or what we're covering, just think about how can we make sure that we're satisfying the same.
So I think there's so many things we can do to make the pages of magazines reflect the real world, and that is by being really humble and actually asking people, what do you want to see? Getting people in the room of power. I find so often there's not enough people in the room making decisions who are diverse and reflect the society we live in. So I think the more people who sign off on campaigns and sign checks who are diverse, then we'll see real change. There are just so many barriers for people who look like me coming into the industry. I know when I was coming into the industry, I was lucky that my mum lived around the corner from Vogue House and I could walk to work. I was lucky that I had somewhere to sleep at night, but I still worked 7 days a week just to be able to be in the industry. It is a brutal thing to try and get in when there's so many things stacked against you. There's money, there is networking. It is so many invisible barriers that you have to overcome. And I think it's when we can start to think about them, talk about them and break them down and see how we can make things easier for talent to flow. Because this isn't about a handout, it's not about affirmative action, it's about unblocking talent so talent can shine. One of the key changes I'd love to see in 2022 for the industry is just to have more voices who have lived different stories come together, because it's a win-win for everybody. The more people who have interesting stories from different backgrounds, different viewpoints, that's how we get really rich, flavoursome stew of publishing.
Last one. You regularly work across both editorial and commercial content. Why does diverse content make good business sense, and what are the barriers to creating it?
I work across, commercial and editorial spaces in terms of creating content, and diversity is just good business in the same way hiring women is good business. I think often we can see racism through a prism of sexism in a much easier way. It doesn't make sense not having really intelligent, hardworking women in boardrooms. In the same way, it doesn't make sense that we don't have people from diverse backgrounds in the boardroom. So it's a win-win. It makes sense. It makes you a lot of money, but sometimes money really isn't the issue. It's about power and prejudice, and that is the real thing. Just in the same way, women have only had the vote for 100 years. It's madness that we've only had 2 female prime ministers. America has not had a female president yet. Why? That's a more interesting question.
As editors, I think we've got a huge influence over how the brands that we work with communicate key messaging, and it's our responsibility to make sure that messaging is inclusive. So for example, when I go out with PRs, my team and I make sure that if they're running a campaign with us, the case studies need to be diverse. We need to have a range of different women from different backgrounds, because that's the Marie Claire DNA, and we can actually put pressure on a brand to change or shift the imagery or the content that they are creating if it's with us to fall in line with those values, and for me that's really important.